all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Double Feature Podcast, where every week me and my boy David go back and forth, bringing two movies together, trying to find a great movie marathon, a good way to kill a weekend, a great double feature. David, how are you doing?
I'm fantastic, Dean. I am really feeling the love in the air, the bullets flying, the deep summer sun of LA, or the terrible airplane food that may make you sick.
Yeah, this is a very good summary of what we saw this week. Why don't you tell people what we're gonna be watching?
This is probably going to be my favorite double feature this month. It's going to be the Leslie Nielsen double feature of Airplane and The Naked Gun, two certified American comedy classics.
Oh God, yes. So, like Naked Gun, I've never seen Naked Gun before this. I've seen Airplane like infinite number of times. I love Airplane. It's one of my favorite movies. And yeah, watching both of these, I can completely understand why these are considered some of the best like American comedies made in the last 40, 50 years. Yeah, they're stone cold classics. Great movies.
I don't know, man. I just like every moment of both of these movies, and especially Naked Gun, which is my favorite of the two. They really do just do cram the full thing, everything full of comedy, and I don't know. I feel like there's something in these that I can't quite put my finger on, but it just doesn't exist anymore. Maybe it's Leslie Nielsen. Maybe it's that kind of slimy version of American comedy that isn't around anymore. But
That's
it's like a good hot dog in the middle of New York City. It's like a slip and slide on a summer day. It's just
it's just something oddly satisfying when you watch movies like this, right?
mm,
Because that came up last week when we were talking about Mel Brooks, where his kind of comedies just don't get made anymore. And these like Airplane and Naked Gun, these feel very like these movies don't get made anymore. You don't get comedies that have a lot of just background gags. You movies that play their goofy stuff as straight as possible and they're still really funny. I mean, granted, like the Scary Movie franchise and those kind of films kind of evolved out of these, right? Like they're because those like parody films, I guess you can call them like parody films, really spawned out of these satire comedies from like the 80s, right?
yeah, because these are parody films. I mean, Airplane being a parody of like the '70s disaster movies, Naked Gun being a parody of kind of more in general noir or police dramas that take on a sort of noirish tone.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I would say that those movies are born out of this, born out of Mel Brooks. I was kind of, I didn't really think that we were going to do two genre parody masters back to back when I
Yeah.
picked these because there's something about both Airplane and Naked Gun that just kind of feels original aside from the parody. Like these could be funny. I think even without knowing what they're making fun of.
Oh yeah. I mean, they're also coming from the same director creative team with Abrams and the Zucker brothers because and I think that that shows a lot because it's the same brand of comedy, but you can see that there's an evolution in it. Like we were talking about again last. I'm going to keep referencing back because it feels like this is almost a repeat of the Mel Brooks episode just with a different lens.
Right.
Because with Mel Brooks, we saw his evolution as a director with Blazing Saddles to Robin Hood Men in Tights, and it was a thing where he understood his comedy, he understood his craft, and he hit a plateau with what he could work with in terms of his comedy. And then with Airplane and Naked Gun, it's a thing because they're made 8 years apart. And it's a thing where Airplane is the debut comedy, and then Naked Gun is the refining of that comedy, right? And granted, I don't know how much their comedies have declined since then, but
Well, on top of that, there was a television show that this is that the Naked Gun kind of comes from. That's why
oh,
it's
Police Squad?
yeah, Naked Gun from the Files of the Police Squad. but I almost feel like nobody even like the TV show Police Squad doesn't even show up on many people's radar, even though it's part of this whole Leslie Nielsen canon, as you might call it.
Hmm. Yeah.
This movie is even bigger than that.
Oh yeah. Well, Police Squad was one of those shows that it only ran for like 6 episodes. It was a really small run for a TV show.
Yeah,
And it was exactly like Naked Gun. It was basically Naked Gun the TV show, and the people behind it, the people who had all the money for the show, just didn't get it. So they axed the project,
yeah,
even though the ratings were really good. But they thought, oh, it's only good ratings now, but it's gonna decline really quickly, and then we're just not gonna make any money out of it. So we'll just axe the project now instead of waiting for the decline. And they decided to use a lot of like basically they used most of the plots that they were going to use for later episodes to make Naked Gun.
and who would have thought that they would have gone on? And this may be spoiling an end of show bit. They would have gone on to literally make a close to $500 million masterpiece. I mean, this would hand over fist making money for them. I mean, what a hindsight is 2020. I think here.
Yeah. It's the same thing where people, okay, Leslie Nielsen, when they brought him in for Airplane, he was only known for dramatic roles, right? Like the other famous movie Leslie Nielsen was in that I can think of is like Forbidden Planet from like the 50s. He comes in 1980 and they're like, "We want you to play basically the straight man in a ridiculous world, and you're just going to do ridiculous things but play it like you're in a drama." And we find out that Leslie Nielsen is the funniest deadpan comedian ever,
Absolutely.
right? And I think that's a big reason why these movies work so well is Leslie Nielsen's work as an actor, as a comedic actor in Airplane and in Naked Gun, because I think that's kind of the focus we came in on this with, where the two best Leslie Nielsen comedies, right? Airplane, Naked Gun.
Yeah, and unfortunately, kind of the some of the only two of his short movie making career. I mean, you really do wish that this guy got a much more drawn out career because he could have been just one. He is one of the classics, but he could have been even more important to the American comedy history, like a Steve Martin, even if he had been given more of a chance. Because the other thing that is of note is that Leslie Nielsen is quite old by the time he gets to make his hits.
It is true, because he's he was born in 1926, and Airplane is the movie that basically people realized, oh, he's a comedian. He's not a dramatic actor. He's not, gonna play old grandpa for the rest of his career. He's gonna play the comedian. And what's that? It's like from 1926 to 1980. That's I'm sorry, I'm really bad. He's like what, 54? He's like 54, like almost 60 by the time he gets to make it.
Pretty much, and even then is kind of like for a 50-year-old certainly showing age, but then it is kind of one of the things that I always kind of find it funny about the Naked Gun in particular, because he kind of looks a little bit younger in Airplane, but
Yeah.
um, is that
He still has dark colored hair basically.
yeah, and by the time Naked Gun comes around, you basically are watching an old man play a 30-year-old's game, which is hilarious, and in a
Mhm.
like kind of a they didn't mean to way, maybe playing on the whole like 40s 50s the 50-year-old man marries the 20-year-old girl trope, but
Oh, the pinnacle of like Humphrey Bogart noir films,
yeah,
where Humphrey Bogart's supposed to be playing like the washed up like 20-30 year old like detective, but you can tell the guy's in his mid 40s.
yeah, I mean, so maybe there's a silver lining here, quite literally, no pun intended. uh
Yeah.
but at the same time, I really wish this guy would have gotten more career, especially because, by the way, it eventually kind of comes to an end when both Mel Brooks and him meet for one. uh,
Yeah.
uh,
They meet for Dracula Dead and Loving It,
yeah.
and that was kind of the end of that was probably like the end of these brand of comedies, right?
Uh, Well, technically no, because you again the Zuckers go on to make the wildly popular Scary Movie series, a slew of other kind of teen comedy movies such as Not Another Teen Movie, Superhero Movie. All those come out of these things, although they're pretty cookie cutter. They're not as
Mm.
creative as these two comedic
It's
minds.
the it's the thing where they find the formula that just prints money in the scary movie franchises, and then they just kind of let that do its thing for the rest of their run, right?
Yeah, and I would be interested to see what would come out of these kind of genre satires nowadays because I feel like genre movies certainly aren't so much a part of the American industry. Like now, it's all about maybe subverting genre, or genres aren't even like the point of the movie. So it'd be kind of hard to do them now. I don't even know what like a superhero satire would be the closest thing, but that and there are those things they exist. There's that
Deadpool is like the closest.
right, even though that's kind of still within the machine, and like the next close thing I could think of is that show that's on Amazon that's like wildly popular.
Oh, The Boys?
Yeah, isn't that kind of like a satire of the?
Um, The Boys is a dark comedy and it's amazing. I read The Boys comic book by Garth Ennis, and it's one of my favorite like series ever. It's a giant deconstruction of the superhero genre. It's a pitch black comedy in parts. It's also a gruesomely like horrifying like gore fest in other parts, and it's great. I love it.
Yeah, and
In terms of adaptation, it's also a pretty damn good adaptation of the comic books.
so I mean, these kinds of things exist, but in terms of like a wildly comedic take on things, yeah, I'd love to see more of this kind of genre being made, especially on the caliber, by the way, that Naked Gun is, because it's. I'm saying it now. It's by far and away my favorite of the two.
Really? Okay. I'm a diehard Airplane kind of guy. Don't get me wrong. Naked Gun was like top tier, but I'm a diehard Airplane person myself.
I would say it's probably the more famous of the two, certainly.
Probably. It's one of those things where I think I like seeing more like raw-ish kind of filmmaking, right? And Airplane feels a little less polished than Naked Gun.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah. Well, I guess we did our whole spiel for the beginning, about Leslie Nielsen, about the Zuckers, about Abrams, about kind of the genre. Let's talk about these movies individually a little bit more in depth. Where do you want to start? Because I started Airplane into Naked Gun
Well,
because chronological, right?
yeah, I did Airplane Naked Gun as well. I mean, so why don't we just in that case, because it's been quite a while, I think, since we did the same order. Uh,
Yeah.
let's just break into Airplane. Let's get this thing going.
All right. Now, sir, it's your time to shine. Give us the log line, the elevator pitch for Airplane.
Right. Airplane is a drunkard ex-pilot overcomes his traumatic past to land a plane that is doomed for landing after a tragic food poisoning incident incapacitates anyone else qualified.
Oh my. We have a whole drama here.
Yes.
And here's the best part. So did you know that Airplane is based on another movie?
Uh,
It almost steals the script one for one from it.
I'm not aware of this.
Yeah, I think it's called, oh god, it's not called Darkest Hour, or like it's something weird like that. It's one of those like 1950s or 60s like plane disaster movies that no one remembers,
Right.
but the Zuckers and Abrams saw it on like some late night TV thing. It was like one of those things where they were playing to fill air,
Hmm.
and they were like, if we just turned this up to 11 in some parts, we can steal the plot from this and make a pretty funny comedy.
Yeah, and I like that that would be kind of the inspiration for the thing in the first place because I almost feel like that kind of accidental stumbling upon a thing can make for better inspiration rather than like setting out to do something and being too stuck inside the bit. Um, or at least in my mind, that's where a lot of this stuff kind of comes from and is always better.
That's true. I think there is a point where being stuck in a bit makes it work not as well, right?
Right.
It's the thing. It's kind of like the Family Guy thing that people get, is how a lot of their comedy kind of changed in terms of Family Guy is they're gonna tell a joke and they're gonna do the joke until it stops being funny, until it works itself back onto itself and starts being funny again, right? Whereas a thing where the joke's gonna go on so long, it's eventually gonna stop being funny, but then it's gonna keep going after that and be funny again.
Yeah.
But this doesn't do that.
Yeah, I don't think it does. I think there was an interesting thing that we observed last week about Mel Brooks in that the latter half of his career, and we observed this in Robin Hood Men in Tights. He kind of got to observing pop culture in his movies, whereas before he didn't do that so much.
Mm.
But I kind of think that Zucker and Nielsen and everybody that is involved with this still does that in both of these movies and does it quite well in my mind. I mean, not only do they include pop culture stars of the time. I mean, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar here, and then OJ and the other one, which is
Also, did you get a yikes? Did you get a yikes when OJ showed up? Because
it's kind of funny because I've never watched The Naked Gun when OJ was an innocent person. It's always been OJ's in the movie, and we know what he may or may not have done.
may or may not have probably totally absolutely did.
Yeah, and it's even funnier now to me because of the whole he's back on Twitter thing, and like the kind of the zeitgeist around OJ being like totally happy to be kind of tongue in cheek about his murder. Because a lot of stuff I've noticed lately when people talk about it is they bring up all the clips of him like being interviewed by the news where people who go up in public and they're like, "Ah, wow, I'd really like to shake the hand of a murderer," and he's always like, they're always like, doesn't that bother you at all? And he's like, "Nah, not the least bit."
OJ is like, I got thicker skin than that.
Yeah.
Not as thick as okay, I'm not gonna make a murdering my wife joke on this podcast. I like this podcast.
Yeah, I mean,
But yeah, dude.
there's for me what it is there's a funny irony in how often he gets beat up in that movie.
Yeah.
But
it is so
opposite of that too. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is a great charismatic person for Airplane. I mean, he has like less of a part of it in that one, but still, I mean, they know how to cast some really good people.
Oh yeah. It's really funny. Also, I remember the name. The movie is called 0 Hour. That's the movie that Airplane steals a lot of the plot from.
Interesting.
But yeah. But on that note of, them kind of working with the bits and all that stuff, and casting pop culture people and knowing how to really work their zeitgeist and things like that, it feels like does Airplane feel like a movie from like 1980, right? Like the late 70s, early 80s, like that kind of end of New Hollywood kind of feel? Does it feel like it's stuck in that time? Because for me, it feels like it almost transcends that. Like the bits still work. It doesn't feel like I'm locked down into this comedy only works because it's in the 1980s.
Yeah, I feel like both of these movies have that. An Airplane, I think, especially could be. We've kind of talked a little bit about like whenever these questions come up, if the movies could be done again today. Airplane, I think, of the two, and again, this is why I think it's probably more famous, could be done today. And especially, like you said, lives kind of more evergreen than The Naked Gun. The cop genre nowadays, maybe especially because of the current cultural climate, probably is something that people wouldn't find either as funny or just kind of understand because they aren't familiar with it. Whereas Airplane, it being a disaster movie, which has been in droves over the past decade. I mean, if we San Andreas, Skyscraper. Well, actually, now
the slew of 2012 movies that came out,
or of recently, there was that movie Greenland. There was Yellowstone. There was, well, yeah. So I feel like, now that I think about it, after listing all those movies, especially now thinking about The Rock was in a majority of those movies, maybe it's time for another parody like this. I mean, it could happen.
You make Airplane, but instead of casting Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, you cast The Rock in the same role, and you just make the same movie.
Oh, you know what it is? Okay, so you know how like SpaceX is starting to get around to like the rockets that can go into space and come back, and commercial.
Yeah, they're actually starting to get to commercial air travel,
yeah,
right, or space
commercial
travel,
space flight and everything. The first commercial space flight goes wrong. That's your movie.
Oh
because
man.
you cast celebrities, caricatures of rich people, people who like win a
Oh,
contest to go on the ride.
dude. Okay, you remember that movie? It came out a couple years ago. It was like that one of those Seth Rogen and one of those Seth Rogen comedies. It was like The End or whatever, where
Oh
it was like
yeah.
Seth Rogen, Rihanna, so those guys, but they're on the SpaceX first flight, and it's piloted by like The Rock as like, oh, he's a celebrity, he's gonna be our celebrity co-pilot or whatever, and the pilot's like, oh, these things run themselves. You're gonna sit there, you're gonna be cool, it's fine. They voted you for the Teen Choice Awards or whatever to do this, and if everything goes awry, oh my god, it's gonna be good. And then you have Anthony Hopkins playing Leslie Nielsen. It's gonna be awesome.
Dude, I could get down with that because you can even go as far as to say, and this kind of again gets me to think about the fact that maybe this is a genre that exists currently. You could even go as
Mhm.
far as to say that you could make fun of movies like Gravity, which is technically a disaster drama.
Yeah.
Man, it's waiting to be written. Nobody steal that.
Right. That is, but you see, I think that's kind of one of those things, and why I like Airplanes so much is it feels so evergreen in the thing that it's poking fun of, because I saw this movie when I was like 7, 8, something like that. So well in the 90s, early 2000 kind of time, and the jokes, the adult jokes went over my head because I'm a little kid, but as I get older, I'm like, no, the jokes are still good. The jokes are still comedy, and the thing that it's parodying them, I've still recognized that stuff. Like those disaster kind of movies never went away, really. So I recognize that from other movies. I'm like, oh, okay, I get that. That's funny, blah, 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 blah. But again, and then get to the actual comedy of the movie. I think there's so many of the jokes in Airplane that still hold up. There's no jokes that are like, you know, yeah, that's only funny because I get a reference from like 1974. Or that's only funny because, it's poking fun at something that existed, but not really. Or yikes, that's kind of a joke that doesn't age really well. I think there's not a lot of jokes like that in Airplane. I think they all kind of work. Thoughts, opinions?
No,
Is there a joke in here that you got to go like yikes, bro?
no. The only thing I can think of, there's okay. So there's two bits that are both some of the most classic funny moments of this movie, but at the same time, yeah, I'm sure really wouldn't get play nowadays. But they might. I don't know because I feel like you could transform them. Is either the disco scene that only because it's kind of dated, you know.
Disco is dead.
Yeah, even though it's still funny, I think because they play with the physical comedy of it,
Hmm.
or the jive turkey scene. But
Oh,
not
come
even
on.
because it would be deemed offensive, even because in my mind, I feel like if you transform it right, you could get away with it and in the right way. It's just that that kind of slang doesn't exist anymore. So unless I feel like there's probably a bigger portion of the population that wouldn't get it than that would get it now. But
That's probably true.
yeah,
I mean, it is interesting that you point out the two parts of the movie where I'm like, oh, this movie ages perfectly, and then it's like, no, the two things that are super dated in this movie, because yeah, those two things are ultra dated.
yeah,
It just never even occurred to me about like the jive talking stuff, that is like, oh yeah, that's kind of really dated. No one really talks like that even at the time, but no one talks like that now.
yeah. And I could see how the bit maybe was just timely because that kind of thing was of a pop culture reference rather than an
Mhm,
actual cultural reference.
mhm.
Um, that kind of thing was probably much more existing in the realm of entertainment than anything else. But I feel like now you could get down with something like there's so much more slang that is kind of poorly made fun of in popular entertainment now. It's kind of cringy
Mhm.
a lot of times,
A
but
little.
if you put a grandma in front of it, like they did in this bit, it might be a lot funnier. Just because all of a sudden she's just great at talking to two guys
You,
who have their own lingo. You know?
you know that the old lady that is like, oh, don't worry, stewardess, I speak jive. That's like Mrs. like Beaver from Leave It to Beaver.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's a really weird get for this movie, but that kind of works.
You know,
Oddly enough, that's kind of funny.
and you know what? It was probably a cameo that much more people got at the time, but nowadays you kind of think of it as like, well, you got to get your work from somewhere, you know? I mean,
Yeah,
and this is a good movie to
yeah,
get it from. I mean that
it's true.
that bit will live on forever, I'm sure.
Oh yeah. Oh
I mean, I
yeah.
hope.
Please, please, America, let Airplane like live forever. I love this movie.
Yeah.
It's so funny.
I'm trying not to do the whole old man yells at
Yells at
cloud thing again
mm,
like I did last episode, but there is some part of me that like when I think about not so much the fact that movies are dying because they're never going to die. I really don't think that medium um, until we figure out a way to like VR and port ourselves into a virtual space where we can become the Rock and until it becomes something totally transformed and different. Movies are going to be something that people always go back to because narrative is something that can't exist on popular platforms that are taking over entertainment time, so to speak.
yeah.
Eh,
Well, on that note, it's a thing where movies are almost like the perfect way to express like storytelling, right?
yeah,
Because humans love story, like humanity, people, everyone likes stories. They like being told stories, listening to stories, hearing things. Like that's like baseline human understanding of the world is storytelling,
yeah.
right?
And we've offset on the show before that there's a reason that the 120 minutes, 120 pages, whatever you want to call it, exists, is because it kind of is the perfect medium to get everything you need to into a story without being making it long-winded, like we experienced sometimes last month,
A little.
or on other movies on this podcast. But yeah, there is something about me that just really wishes that because comedies have kind of gone on a lull in the past few years. There's been some good ones, and maybe it's also that people. It's been harder to get people to go see comedy when that medium of entertainment, comedy as like a genre of entertainment rather than just in movies, exists on so many other platforms. You can watch television shows that are, by the way, old, not even the new ones. You can go back and binge as many of these old shows as you want. Like The Office is a popular example.
Yeah.
You,
The Office is one of those TV shows that has such a fan base. That is a cultural touchstone that will probably never die, right?
which is interesting to me because some of those cultural touchstones that exist in that show don't even really exist anymore. Like people less and less are in an office setting, let alone at a paper company, which is like, what does that even look like today? Yeah, the gray cubicle trope that show plays on, I don't know if that totally exists for so many people anymore, or to the point where it gets a whole show to make fun of it. And I'd almost be inclined to wonder like what shows are coming next that would take on that thing, or what movies are coming next to take on that thing. Because again, to our point about why we watch these movies, that's kind of what we're doing here. Is these movies were making fun of something that existed in the cultural zeitgeist, and that did a fantastic job at it because some people were kind of fed up with how crappy these pieces of shit were.
Mm.
Not these two movies. I mean the movies they're making fun of.
Yeah, it's true because when you think about it, like the key to a lot of comedy is it's a few things, right? It's like knowing your audience. It's like knowing where to punch up and where to punch down, and like just the timing, right? I mean, there's also the other like tried and true thing where people say comedy is pain, and that's where slapstick basically spawned out of.
Mm.
It will always be funny to see somebody slip on a banana peel and fall down, right? But yeah, because I think these movies, that's where they're keying in on. They know their audience. They're not playing for they're playing for the cheap seats, right? They're playing for the everyday person. Like people who go to the movies, work a 9 to 5, and they know these like shitty tropes because they've seen them on like TV. They know what's going on. They know their audience, and they know to punch up when they have to, and they know when to punch down when they have to because they're like, yeah, we're gonna punch up at the weird, crazy, like studio system where all these movies are basically the same, because they make money, and we're gonna punch up at that because studios don't know what they're doing. And I already forgot the third thing I said, or the timing. And these movies know to keep jokes. Like jokes are funny when they're pretty short to the point, or I mean, granted, you can get comedy out of really long-winded stuff. It just depends. But they know when to kill a bit, and they know when to put in something a little bit more serious, so the next funny bit hits harder. Right? They know when to space things out, and they know how long a bit has to be funny before it stops being funny, and how short a bit needs to be just be a punchy, quick thing of dialogue. Because that's the thing about both these movies. A lot of jokes are just quick dialogue bits, right?
Yeah,
You
and
know,
I think that plenty of excellent points in there. There's one I want to go back to, but to finish up your point, yeah, some of the best parts of these movies are like the quick dialogue bits, just because. While in Naked Gun, it's very specifically poking at the genre anyway, which had snappy dialogue.
mhm.
But I would even say that yeah, a lot of the times it's just like Leslie Nielsen being one of the kings of the one-liner goes and makes it even better. You know, you made an interesting point in the second one, I think, about it being for the common man. Yeah, they're punching for the cheap seats. I feel like that's what is doesn't exist now. You know what I'm saying? Like I feel like
Mhm.
studios or writers or whoever's fault it is, for some reason, aren't really connecting with common audiences when they have every resource available to them to do that. Like all you really have to, in my opinion, all you really have to do is go on TikTok or Twitter or some one of these popular free, totally free social media platforms, and just look at what people are laughing at. You know, I mean, and that for some reason that's not translating to the screen, and maybe it's also because these mediums are very quick. You know, jokes are in and out within the span of a week or a month.
Mhm.
But even then, I think that there's a mechanic to the way that people laugh at things and people make fun of things that you don't have to rely on whatever the joke of the moment is, but instead you realize, okay, how are people finding these things, and how can we create things that similarly that these people would laugh at. But that's the genius that I think the Zuckers took to both these movies. It's not necessarily just about, you know, like you said, making fun of whatever's in the news. It's just about making fun of also daily life and how shitty it is to park at an airport, or how crappy airplane food is, or how stupid it is that kids get to go in the cockpit of a plane. You know, and then on top of that, it's the way they make fun of it, and everything is stuffed full of it. You know, making it constantly plays those tricks on your brain with those quick one-liners, and that in a lot of movies you're just expected to go along with the flow, and they're constantly tripping you up like a physical bit almost.
Yeah. It's kind of like when we think back to, okay, remember when we did our political month, right, last year, and we talked about the campaign and we talked about the interview, not on the same episode, but we talked about them, right?
Yes.
And the campaign felt kind of like a comedy that was we came up with a concept and we're going to pretty much let the actors improv the scenes and we'll just kind of cut it together and figure it out later, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the interview felt like it had like an objective, but it was like trying to play a very ridiculous concept very seriously. But it didn't implant like gags or jokes like Airplane does, right? Because Airplane is playing a ridiculous concept as seriously as possible, right? No one is laughing, no one is cracking at the weird shit around them. It's not a Saturday Night Live skit where, Jimmy Fallon starts laughing at his own joke halfway through.
Yeah.
And, with the campaign, it's one of those things where we're just going to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks kind of thing. With Airplane and like, Naked Gun, like later, it's a lot more. They know their jokes, they're practiced jokes, and they're just going to slide them in there. They're going to make sure that they fit and not that we, it's a funny joke. Screw it. We'll throw it on to page 5 and we'll just make it work. It's like, okay, we have this scene. Here's a joke we can put into it. Does it work? Okay, it works good. If it doesn't, we'll take it out. And I think that's kind of an interesting dichotomy because both those movies are more recent comedies, the campaign and the interview, and it's like they're both taking cues from these older style comedies, but they don't take all of the cues that need them that need them to work, right? Am I just talking out of my ass? I feel like I'm talking a little bit out of my
No,
ass.
I totally agree. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting because I feel like the further and further we spiral into it, it's just that we keep just getting back to the deconstruction of comedy, which is fine as far as the conversation goes. Because last episode, the peek behind the curtain is I tried to, for a minute, I almost wanted to replace this episode with, and I'm glad I didn't, two modern comedies, right?
Hmm.
And we were struggling to do that because not a whole lot of movies have come out in the past year, and that's what I was looking for, is maybe something of the times that we could
A
compare.
little bit more, a little bit more contemporary,
Yeah,
and also we couldn't find a lot of good comedies that were just straight comedies.
yeah, everything was kind of like comedy drama, black comedy, comedies. There was one comedy spoof about romantic comedies that was on the list, but even still, it was like we couldn't really find something to pair it with. And I think it just goes back to this whole thing of, I don't know. I don't know why filmmakers are so afraid to just step into a comedy and be like, yeah, let's just throw anything at the wall, and it doesn't need to make hundreds of $1 million. Make it a low budget, like Airplane, but like you said, is
Hmm.
totally fine as a low budget film. Though I don't even think it was like that low budget, but
I mean, I know how much it is. I'm looking at it right now. It's a little bit over $3 million
yeah,
was how much it cost to make Airplane, and this is made in 1980. If you wanted to make an adjustment, it would probably only cost you like 10 million to make now, and might even be cheaper with the advent of like CGI. So like realistically, you can make this for a pretty reasonable independent budget film, and you probably make a pretty decent money back if you had a decent ad campaign.
it almost makes me
Or,
wonder if like there should be a studio out there that's trying to do the Blumhouse financial model just with comedies.
well, honestly, okay, so I'm gonna say this, Mr. Bloom from Bloomhouse, you are my hero because you are reviving good horror films for the masses. Thank you. But yeah, like I really do think that what you're saying about comedies, there should be more more comedies that are like this, right? Granted, it might be a thing where, comedy is subjective. Like what I find funny, some people might not find funny. But for God's sakes, it's Airplane. I've never met anybody who did not like Airplane, who could not like who never cracked a smile during this movie or couldn't laugh at this movie, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. One thing I'm gonna do, because we're gonna need to go to break in a little bit. I'm gonna do a little experiment here during the break. I'm gonna look up, because Seth Rogen and Dave Franco or James Franco have been like the two we've referenced as the modern comedic voices of American cinema. I'm gonna
You
look.
can thank Freaks and Geek for that, right?
Certainly, and a lot of their cinematic success afterward, and Judd Apatow and all that. I'm gonna look up the budgets for a past few of their movies and get a little bit of an average going. And I kind of want to test this and be like, maybe it's just that comedies got too expensive. I don't really know, because I'm
That
very
might be a
interested in
thing.
this.
Yeah, because that's the secret of Hollywood. The only reason they don't make certain movies anymore is because they don't make money anymore.
Yeah,
Hollywood does not care if it offends you. It cares if it can make money off of you. I'm be real with y'all.
pretty much. I mean, I would fairly agree that it's just about the money. It's not, because no matter who it offends, comedy's always offended people anyways. No, I mean, it's just a matter of, it used to be that it offended prim and proper people, and now it kind of offends normal people.
Everyone who thinks they're prim and proper people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's been something they dealt with forever. I mean, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, Christian groups, whatever it may be, they've always existed. But yeah, I would definitely say that everything that Hollywood does comes down to the pile of green they have at the end of the day.
They do a shitload of the pile of white to get to the pile of green later. See, that's the key. But yeah.
Exactly.
So, I guess we'll take a break here. I mean, is there anything you want to say more about Airplane? I know we kind of we barely even talked about the plot really, but we trying to talk about the overarching thing of Airplane. But yeah, I'll give a quick rundown. Airplane's really funny. I really enjoy it. It parodies really old like 50s, 60s, 70s disaster films. I think it really holds up. I don't think any of the jokes run flat. And Leslie Nielsen's basically debut into comedy. And this is a cultural touchstone that I think will never go away. Highly recommended.
I think
David, you got anything you want to throw at the end there before we get to Naked Gun?
no. I mean, like Dean said, recommend it. Go watch it, and we'll get to the other half of this wonderful double feature right after.
Right after.
Maybe this.
Surely it'll be after this, right?
Don't call me Shirley. Dean, I found a great way for us to do something cool and to make a little money on the side.
Ah, great. I've been looking for a new place to put my money. What do you got?
No investment needed. In fact, it's super easy, and there's creation tools we can use to record our podcast right from the phone or computer.
Wait, why would you record a podcast on your phone? You want? No, never mind. Where do I put my money for this?
I don't need any of your money. We can even get our podcast distributed to big streaming platforms like Spotify and Google Podcasts.
Oh, I get it now. We're talking big business here, okay? So you're going to need a lot of money from me. How much money are we talking here?
No, definitely don't need any of your money. In fact, we can make money from the podcast with no minimum listenership.
Okay, now I think I'm getting what you're going at here. We need to spend money to make money, so we're talking some big gains here. Big gains.
No, definitely no. I don't need any of your money. Just all we need to make a podcast right in one place.
Okay. So what you're telling me is that you're gonna need a pretty big check from me for this podcast. So do I just make it out to cash? Because it's no problem for me. I'll just write it up right now.
No, listen, Dean, just head over to anchor.fm and check it out. You'll see why Anchor is the best place for us to record, edit, and distribute our podcasts. And I definitely do not need any of your money.
Shut up and take my money. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to part 2 of our double feature here at the Double Feature Podcast. And here on our Leslie Nielsen tribute episode, we're going to be talking about Naked Gun. Arguably one of David's favorite comedies. Arguably the Leslie Nielsen comedy that will live on forever. Arguably the one that showed that Leslie Nielsen is a comedy god. David, where do we get started here?
I mean, where do we get started? Because, okay, before we get on with everything, at the break we did say that we were going to do this little experiment on budgets and box office. We ran the numbers. We called the lab. We got the results. Sent it to the boys. The boys looked at it. They analyzed the numbers. We crunched the numbers. We got it all.
Yeah.
We basically really only made averages for Seth Rogen and James Franco movies. But
it's fine. Only like 5 of them too, but it's fine.
Yeah, and this is kind of, again, to our point from before the break that I feel like there's some sort of business model that could churn out these low-budget movies that are pretty cookie-cutter, like an Airplane or a Naked Gun, that could make money. As long as you keep giving them, by the way, I think the caveat to this that we kind of learned through this experiment is that it's not so much that comedies themselves end up losing money over time. It's that eventually you need to move on to a new comedic voice.
Yeah.
Because I basically ran for some of the most popular Seth Rogen, James Franco movies. Superbad, Pineapple Express, The Interview, which is kind of an outlier in this, and I'll explain why in a moment.
Mm-hmm.
Sausage Party, and The Disaster Artist. Average budget was $23.8 million. Fairly low.
Yeah, that, again, people hear like 23.8 million. I could live the rest of my life on that. In movie terms, that's a pretty moderate, low-ish budget kind of movie, right? Like, I think low budget is considered like anywhere between like around like 10 million and 20 is like a pretty moderate like budget, but it's still pretty low.
Yeah, because that's considering that this is the mean from, because Superbad is probably the low budget movie on that list.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't need any special effects. Pretty much you just need locations, some good actors, etc.
And also most of the actors in Superbad were basically no name at that point. Like, I think Michael Cera was the biggest star, and he was from Arrested Development.
Pretty much.
Right?
And then, like, approaching 24 million is where you start to say, okay, there's some stars in this film, and there's some special effects, a la something like The Interview.
Yeah.
Now, the average box office from all these, though some of them made wild amounts of money, it still came out to the average being 91.2 million, which is still fantastic by any stretch of the terms.
The goal in Hollywood is make double your budget, and they made way more than that.
at least 4 times. And what now? There's an outlier in there in that the interview, because of the circumstances surrounding that movie, which we covered on that episode. We did do the interview on this podcast. If you want to go watch that one, um, basically that movie got tanked because of the North Korean government, and then it only ended up making, I think, 19 million on what was like a $30 million budget. But
Yeah.
even still, I'm sure all the streaming made up for that because it was wildly popular on Netflix.
Yeah, and that's kind of a thing when you kind of look at modern comedies, cuz I guess the closest comedies that these movies are related to are the Zucker movies, right? The scary movies, the Not Another Teen movies, the Meet the Spartans, those kind of movies that those movies actually died a very slow and painful death. Cuz I don't think we have another movie until like after 2010, really? I can't think of any.
Pretty much. I mean, this experiment would also be probably good to repeat with those scary movies. Now, I mean, the reason I think we chose the Seth Rogen one is because it's important to our Leslie Nielsen argument, where there's a star behind it.
It's true.
Whereas at the same time, the Zucker ones could probably be a good place to do it because the first scary movie probably was fairly low budget and made a lot of money back. Whereas then later ones not having any star power, but being of the genre that we're talking about, are a different story.
Mhm.
But yeah, I don't know. I think the thing I learned from most of it was just that eventually you need to find new comedic stars, and at least take the money that you budgeted and profited on in those movies, and put it into a little experimentation with that. You know?
It's that's true. Like I feel comedy is one of those genres that it's weird because people say comedy can be evergreen if the jokes are good. But no, comedy evolves. Like comedy changes. Like people find new things funny for different reasons. You know, some comedies tick into a zeitgeist or tick into an idea that's very of the time and it evolves and it works. And that's kind of where we get Naked Gun to round it back to the subject here. Because Naked Gun taps into a very particular kind of like zeitgeisty genre, right? The cop movie. Which,
Yeah,
let's be honest, do we even get cop movies anymore? Like movies about like a detective investigating a mystery and it's, you know, Heart of LA noir. Because this feels like it's almost a parody of Lethal Weapon that we've done before.
right.
And I think Lethal Weapon came out way before this, and I think the sequel to Naked Gun is a actual straight parody of Lethal Weapon.
Yeah, I mean, you could go as far as to say Lethal Weapon was a parody of itself.
It's true.
Uh,
It's true.
only because it's so fucking awesome. But
Lethal Weapon,
yeah,
it should be just a comedy with how ridiculous it gets at some points.
yeah. But yeah, cop stories anymore. Yeah, I don't feel like they happen all that often. It's either that those kind of stories get saved for police procedurals that are popular on networks and cable channels or whatever.
Law and Order is the show branding that will never die.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Or opposite of that, there's been a few that I've noticed, but they end up being like one of two different things. They're either the very I guess the movie I'm trying to talk about is something like End of Watch. Have you seen that one?
I wait. I think I know that one. Is that the one with
Jake Gyllenhaal?
Jake Gyllenhaal. Yeah, I know that movie. Yes.
So that kind of movie comes around every once in a while, where it's kind of pro cop and kind of a movie about the realities of being a cop.
Yeah.
And I would even, by the way, recommend
yeah.
End of Watch for anybody who wants to go watch it. Fantastic, I think.
I think
The
that's
other-
a big caveat to a lot of cop movies now. It's, you know, the institution of the police isn't good, but the people who have to do the job are good. But, you know, sometimes there's bad people in there, but sometimes there's good people. I think a lot of cop movies now are very wishy-washy on is there a good guy or a bad guy in the movie.
And that seems more close to some ones I've seen in the past few years, which I remember there being one about there's the main character is a woman cop. She's black, but she's dealing with this like secret police cabal that's like trying to assassinate her for like doing the right thing. It's weird, and especially in it came out in like 2017 or 18 or
Hmm.
something. And I'd look it up, but it's not worth the point at this point. But it's just one of those things where I feel like because of what's going on right now, that kind of thing is probably not what everybody wants to watch, or that if you go to the audience that wants to watch it, it's gonna just kind of ruffle everybody's feathers. I don't know.
It's kind of like the thing when we did Three Billboards not too long ago, where the police in that movie are portrayed as not incompetent, but like um unable to actually get answers. Where we have one police officer who, let's be honest, would not be a police officer, played by Sam Rockwell, and then we have Woody Harrelson, who is basically the closest thing to Jesus we have in this film, where he's just super nice and like is trying his damnedest. He just can't get anywhere.
Yeah, that one I feel like is a much more a critique on like the cop caricature from American media,
Hmm.
especially because the writer Martin McDonough was foreign, so he's probably going on that versus like how people actually operate as law enforcement individuals. But um, Leslie Nielsen certainly doesn't operate as a law enforcement individual. He probably operates more as like a, a clown with a badge. But
Yeah.
it's entirely perfect the whole time through. I mean, I guess to really get into the to Naked Gun, let's do the same thing that we did from Airplane and kind of go favorite bits that we think would work nowadays, bits that we wouldn't think would work. What do you
Well,
think, Dane?
okay. Well, the first thing that doesn't work in this movie is O.J. Simpson for obvious reasons.
Yeah, I
Granted,
mean, I
he's dead for most of the movie, so it's whatever.
yeah.
But yeah, the so that was the thing when I was watching this movie, because I'd never seen it before. My brother actually watched it with me, and he had never seen it before either. And my
Mm,
brother laughed at the whole movie, and he made a comment like, "Man, they don't make movies like this anymore." And I was
mm.
again, that was another caveat to the entire like theme we're going on so far. But yeah, I was watching it, and it was so funny because it's the fact that Leslie Nielsen never acknowledges that what he's doing is ridiculous or
Oh
what
yeah,
he's doing is funny. He's just like, this is completely normal. Like, this world is ridiculous. This is completely normal, but yeah, this is fine. Like, it's okay. Like,
yeah. I'd be hard pressed to think about like because there's two. I think there's two layers so that they don't make movies like this anymore. Comment and we kind of went over it in Airplane, but this one and more apparently they don't do deadpan anymore. Like I feel like
yeah.
that's a genre that's almost either lost to time or I won't say it doesn't exist because I feel like there are comedians on the fringe that do it. Um, there was a former SNL cast member and his name escapes me, so this kind of makes it a moot point. But he did a show that went straight to streaming a while ago. It was like a sketch comedy show,
Hmm.
very heavy in deadpan silliness like this, where the delivery is deadpan, but it's completely absurdist comedy. It's really hilarious, but because of the fact that that can't exist on like the mainstream, you can find that thing under the rug. But I almost really wish that they would give somebody a chance to do something like this because it's like the best part about this deadpan, to your point, is it's silly. It's not even like kind of dark deadpan or like cynical deadpan of a comedic mind like Janine Garofalo or
Yeah.
somebody like that.
It's one of those things where he lives in a clown world and he doesn't realize it's a clown world. And that's where a lot of the comedy comes from.
Hmm.
What is it? My favorite bit in the movie is when he's at the docks and he, gets the like the dock worker, the guy who like sees all the ships, and he's like, "Yeah, oh, will this loosen your load or whatever?" And he gives him like $20, and then the dock worker, and then he's like, "Oh, I can't tell you that. That's strictly confidential." And the dock worker's like, "Well, will this lighten your load?" And he gives him back his $20 he just got from him, and they go through that bit for like a couple of minutes, and it's hilarious. And then he just walks away. It's 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 just
No,
it's just funny.
no mention of it ever
No
again.
mention of it again. It's like the funniest bit.
Not even like music to like narrate the silliness, you know?
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's one thing that really separates what we mean by there's no acknowledgement of it. Is that there's not that the movie itself doesn't even let you know that you need to be laughing at this. It just says, of course you'll laugh at this because we fucking wrote it.
Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like, no, everything's completely serious here. If you laugh at it, yeah, sure, go for it. But like the movie is playing it as straight as possible. And it's
Yeah.
great. I'm gonna assume your favorite part is the umpire breakdance.
You'd think that the baseball scene, especially because it takes place at Angel Stadium, would be, but it's actually not my favorite. I think my favorite thing throughout the whole movie is that whenever Leslie Nielsen drives, especially during that first half, he crashes into everything. It's
Oh,
it's like the
yes.
perfect catches you, like my favorite kind of comedy catches you off guard, and that one. I'm sure your brother, being a first time viewer, or
Hmm.
even you, now that I think about it like that again, you were also a first time viewer. That when it catches things catch you off guard like that, they're like 10 times more funny.
It is the thing where it's like drive-by comedy, right? Goes in,
Yeah,
hits you with the joke, leaves right away.
quite literally. Yeah,
Yeah, actually, yeah, exactly. Drive-by comedy. We're gonna hit him with the car, and we're gonna drive off before he realizes what's happening.
yeah,
And I think that's like Naked Gun, and to the point of Airplane, these are drive-by comedies. They come in, it's a normal scene, comes in, hits you with the joke, leaves before you realize what's going on, and you laugh at it because it's ridiculous. But then the scene just plays on.
yeah.
Or they have the lovemaking scene where she's like, I practice safe sex, and he's like, I do too, and then they're just in a giant condom suit.
World famous.
And
Yeah,
it's played as a completely normal like seduction lovemaking scene, and then they're just in giant latex bodysuits.
I
Just
don't know, man. I mean, like, I feel like that kind of that's a joke that certainly could work today.
oh
I
yeah.
think that joke would be evergreen from here to because it's like, what about it? What about it isn't funny, man? Or like another one I fucking love is the urinal scene in the middle of the press conference.
Oh god, yes. Okay. Is has because that's like a thing when you think about it. You're like, oh, I'm taking a piss. I'm in like a quiet like place, right? I'm at like a movie theater, or I'm at like a museum, right? A museum exhibit, and I go off to the bathroom on the side. I'm taking a piss, and it's all quiet, and I'm like, I know somebody can hear me right outside the door. Oh, they could probably hear this like 6 gallons of water I drank before I showed up, and this movie
Yeah.
takes my fear of people hearing me pee and puts it out everywhere, and it's hilarious. It's so
Or
good.
on top of the fact that it's layered with the whole, it's kind of making fun of the queen. It's kind of, it's making fun of, again, this thing I mentioned where like Leslie Nielsen being an old man, basically.
Hmm.
It's kind of making fun of, the old man in the bathroom kind of thing. I mean,
It
the whole
it's
thing.
a pretty solid piss take of the situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I just feel like it's tough because a comedy is not only a hard thing to deconstruct, even though we've done it plenty of times this episode and last episode, and we'll probably do it again.
Yeah.
Uh, but it's also a difficult thing to put your finger on. It's like because that bit isn't something that you would think and say it's the most obvious thing they could have written in the moment. But at the same time, it's like, well, who else could have written that bit? Like, and that's what I feel like a lot of this movie is. Who else would think to just like, okay, even though it might run up the budget a little bit, every time Nielsen gets into a car, it's going to crash into something. That's just going to be the cap to the scene. Or it's like uh, every time the lady is on screen, we got to do something to play around with her sexuality to make it totally not usable. I mean, like you or the beaver bit. It's just like again, it's another example of that drive-by comedy in a much more non-literal sense.
Yeah. It's one of those things where that's what this movie is excelling at. And I think that's a thing where, Airplane shows that that's what the Zuckers are in. They're into that drive-by comedy, serious scene, crazy, silly, ridiculous thing, and then it carries on like nothing ever happened.
Yeah,
And Naked Gun is that all the way through. And it's like refined down. Like this is where you get that like the razor's edge of that kind of comedy. And then, the decline of that kind of comedy comes later on, right? Where, I think it's not a crazy thing to say that Leslie Nielsen had a career decline in after the mid 90s. Granted, he came back from a career decline in the 60s and 70s, and then 1980 hits. He gets Airplane. His career kind of comes back, becomes a comedian, becomes this comedic actor, does the Naked Gun movies, and then by 2000, by the 2000s, he's done, right? He's not really a leading comedic actor anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like I said in the first half of the episode. It's unfortunate that he wasn't given more time in that prime of his career, because I feel like there's a myriad of things that he could have done that, like off the top of my head, I would have loved to see him parody adventure films like Indiana Jones, and I feel like he would be perfect for it. Or maybe even another one would be, he would be really good to parody like businessman films in the 1980s.
Oh, can you imagine, like, Wall Street with what is it? I think it's Martin Sheen's in it or something like that. But it's the same movie, but Leslie Nielsen is the Martin Sheen character.
Or something, man. It's like
Yeah.
there's so many other things that he could have been plugged into, and it just would instantly make it better.
Yeah.
Um,
Because
but
I'm
yeah,
looking at his filmography, and he tragically passed away he passed away in 2010 at 84. So he was he lived up a hell of a life. He was a very old man. He did a lot of good movies. But I'm looking at the films he made, and like he gets into Scary Movie 3 in 2003, and Scary Movie 3 is probably the best one of those movies, and it's probably because it's Leslie Nielsen in it. And then but other than that, like, there's not a whole lot of movies he's in that I would call great comedies.
yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, yeah. Aside from, I guess, like scary movie stuff, Dracula, Dead and Loving It. If I'm looking kind of through the Wikipedia page to really get like a better grip on all the things that he's um, like been a part of, but I mean, this 2001: A Space Travesty. I've never heard of it, and
Same. Or
it
we have the Mr. Magoo movie, which I know that movie's not good. Putting
yeah,
it out there. I
yeah.
had a childhood. But yeah,
So
like,
I don't
it's
know.
sad.
I don't know. I mean, he is great in Scary Movie 3, so at least he got something. Uh, Scary Movie 3, I think, is the best of that series.
Huh, we're in agreement. Thank you. Thank you.
We are in agreement, of course.
Favorite bit of that movie is when they come out and they're holding the shovels, like, don't worry, we got this. And they cock the shovels and a shotgun shell comes out. I don't know why. I just find that hilarious because they don't acknowledge it. But yeah.
I think to call back to the star of the episode, I think my favorite part is when Leslie Nielsen pees out his own finger.
When they see the aliens, they're like, see, we pee out of here. And he's like, oh, we are alike, you and I. And he does the same thing. And he doesn't, no one acknowledges it. No one thinks that's weird.
And again, it just goes back to that exactly what we're talking about. It's like, it catches you off guard. Nobody else is like it. Leslie Nielsen is just the perfect comedic mind.
He's the perfect person to be in ridiculous stuff because he knows why it's funny. It's funny because he's not acknowledging that it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing of Naked Gun. It's the plot that, Ricardo Montalban is going to mind control one of the outfielders in the Angels to assassinate the Queen. And Leslie Nielsen is like, yes, we got to save the Queen. And I'm over here like, that is the most ridiculous plot to a movie I've ever heard. But granted, the outfielder walks like RoboCop, so it's fine.
You
But yeah,
know, a final interesting note as I'm looking at it here on the Wikipedia page on Leslie Nielsen is that apparently Nielsen also produced instructional golf videos, which of course he did,
yeah, old white man. Yes, yes.
which were not presented in a serious style, beginning with 1993's Bad Golf Made Easier. The videos combined comedy with golf techniques. The series spawned two additional sequels, Bad Golf My Way and Stupid Little Golf Video. I would love to get my hands on those.
I feel I need those movies in my life. I want them on an old VHS too. I want them on like the grimy I want them on like a grimy VHS that's been through a ringer and you get from like your cousin on like Christmas. I want that copy of the movie. But besides the point.
Well,
but yeah, so honestly, Naked Gun as a first-time viewer, I found it great. I thought this was a great movie to watch. I think it's a travesty if most like people don't know about this movie. I think people do though. I feel this is probably a really popular comedy, right? Because I know it had a couple of sequels.
Yeah, wildly. We got Naked Gun 2.5 and then Naked Gun 33 1/3. Both of which I'm pretty sure still found some measure of success. I know Naked Gun 2.5 still did well enough. I mean, it boxed almost 200 million, and then 33 1/3 still made 122.4 million. So the whole series as a whole, he got to be the star of, and it was great for him through 1994. And I recommend checking both of those out. 2.5 is really funny for anybody who wants it, and 33 1/3 if you're a fan of the whole thing. It's kind of one of those things where it's why not just finish it off and give it a shot.
Yeah. And honestly, like that's kind of like why. Okay, we'll do our pretentious minute question real quick, even though we've been a little pretentious the whole episode. But I got a question for you. So last week I asked, what makes these movies funny, right? Because we were talking about Mel Brooks, and he has a very distinctive style, and like, why is that funny? Now we've been talking about the man the whole episode, Leslie Nielsen. Because he's deadpan, because of this and that. But like, why at the end of the day is Leslie Nielsen funny? What makes him so funny in these movies, in these roles? And like, is there a point where that the Zuckers knew how to use him, and that's why he was so successful in these movies and not so successful in other films?
I do think that there's a measure to which you're right, that the Zuckers do know how to use Leslie Nielsen. I'd be interested to look at Dracula Dead and Loving It, because in my mind, you put Nielsen behind a good director, and he's, it's a match made in heaven, which Mel Brooks is a good director, so it's like, you'd think there's something there.
Peanut butter and chocolate makes great candy. Why doesn't this work?
But maybe it's like the difference between dark chocolate and, I don't know, something that doesn't go with dark chocolate that you think would. I don't know. Maybe chocolate and gummy worms. You love both of them anyways, but together it's like, does it really go together? Probably not.
I get that.
And so, yeah, I think it's that the Zuckers and Nielsen probably got together, much like something like Scorsese and De Niro. They got together. They knew what they wanted. They knew each other very well. Zuckers always knew how. I mean, I'd be interested to see also the directing style. I didn't really do much research on that. Was it like hands off? We're going to let you do your thing on camera, or did they give him direction that was perfect? Because Nielsen seems like the type of guy that would know based on the delivery. Mm-hmm. He knows what you need to put on camera, but at the same time, because the Zuckers carry this over into Scary Movie, a lot of that deadpan that exists in the Scary Movie. I'd almost say like Charlie Sheen was a second Leslie Nielsen for them.
Mm-hmm. It's just a thing where Charlie Sheen, after a certain point in his life, became a parody of himself.
Yeah, that's for sure.
In real life. Yeah.
So I don't know. I would be interested to do more research on that, but I would certainly say that this pairing was one of those golden pairs in Hollywood that you just can't. When they come together, it's great, and when they're apart, it's just never going to be as good.
So that's kind of an interesting analysis. So are you of the opinion that Leslie Nielsen was funny because he had a good creative team behind his work, or do you think that he is naturally funny and he can make anything work?
I think he'd be naturally funny because it's one of it goes back to that, like, why I want to view those golf videos. Those are solely done by Leslie Nielsen, so it's almost like it's the perfect litmus test for, is he funny on his own? And something tells me, yeah, it's going to be hilarious.
Yeah.
I'm
not being that much of an asshole. No, Leslie Nielsen is a naturally funny human being.
Of course. But you make a point in that it's like the difference between Adam Sandler is funny in his hit movies, but also not as funny when he was the producer or director of the later stuff.
Yeah.
So there's a point there, but yeah, I would be interested to know because it also could be that maybe it's the same thing that was going on with what we found out with Seth Rogen and James Franco. They're not really doing comedies right now. They're doing more TV stuff, and even then, it's bit parts. I'm pretty sure Seth Rogen of late has started a pottery company,
Mm.
both in he's literally making weed, but is also selling pottery as a part of that. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and they're also doing like behind the scenes stuff too. I know Seth Rogen's really into like product or being a producer, productions and stuff like that. So
Yeah, so I'd
yeah,
be interested to see what comes out of that eventually, but we'll see. They're going to need to start finding young stars eventually, and I feel like that's something that is not being capitalized on so much right now.
mhm,
So somebody's going to need to get on it.
it's true. Well, I think that kind of rounds us out here. Let's I guess the final couple questions, and then we get the outro. So, David, now we've agreed. Is this a good double feature? Yes.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, if you're going to watch any of the Nielsen movies, this is the two you watch. Airplane, Naked Gun. I feel like I've watched this double feature before in my life, and I would watch it again and again and again and again.
This seems like one of those like double features that seems kind of evergreen, right? If you're just in the mood for a comedy, these are in. These are like in the conversation.
Absolutely.
And now, if you can only watch one this weekend, maybe the double feature is going to get cut short and you can only watch one. What are you watching? And as
Uh,
between Naked Gun and Airplane, like it's the classic versus, the peak. It's interesting.
I go with Naked Gun. Uh, but that's it. It comes down to personal taste. I love the bits in Naked Gun probably a little bit more than I love the bits in Airplane. And I don't know. I also enjoy kind of the adventure that Naked Gun takes you on a little bit more than the contained story of Airplane. So that's my personal opinion. But I'm sure you might go with Airplane if I'm guessing correctly.
Well, my heart says Airplane because, again, one of the movies I love to death. I've seen it a million times. I adore it. But I'm going to surprise you because I do think if you're going to watch one this weekend, you should watch Naked Gun. For this reason, David just did pistol guns out of nowhere. He's very excited. Is like, so I've seen Airplane a million times. Airplane's one of those movies where I think a lot of people have seen it. I've never seen Naked Gun, and being a first time watcher, I was going into it being like, okay, it's a comedy from like '88. It's a Leslie Nielsen comedy, so I'm probably gonna laugh at it. It's probably gonna be okay. And then I watched it, I'm like, no, this movie's fantastic. This movie's great. And then my brother watched it with me, and he was like, yeah, this movie's awesome. My brother even asked me, like, hey, which do you think which one of these is better? He actually asked me the podcast question. And my knee jerk reaction was, well, I love Airplane more, but I thought Naked Gun was funnier. And honestly, I think that might hold true. Like, don't get me wrong, Airplane is a funny movie, but I kind of want to just watch Naked Gun again. It might just be
Yeah,
a thing where I've seen Airplane so many times, I might just want to watch something a little bit fresher. So,
yeah. I think what it was, I thought about it for a second. For me, too, it goes back to I think Naked Gun's a little bit more of a spectacle.
mm.
Like from that, and really, it's like the tone of it is set right from that opening title bit where you're following the police siren through these ridiculous.
Oh
I mean,
God,
that
yes.
gets you in the mood for this movie almost immediately. So it's something where it's like it sets off that trigger in my brain. It's like it's the best.
So yeah, if you only had one this weekend, Naked Gun.
Mm.
And David, I think that rounds us out here for this little discussion here on the double feature. Now we have to go in to next week's episode, which is going to be a little bit of a different take on comedies, right?
Yeah, we're kind of taking an interesting detour here that's a little bit more of the experiment double feature of the month. One is a certified comedy. We're going to be doing Doctor Strangelove, or a long title at the end that I can never particularly remember,
How
but
I Learned to Relax and Love the Bomb.
There you go.
Come on.
Stanley Kubrick's only comedy. It's one of my favorite movies, and I can't wait for it.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from that, we're doing Martin Scorsese's The King of Comedy. Now, this one, maybe not so much a specific comedy, but kind of maybe a dark comedy. And I'm
Yes.
interested to see, because Kubrick's movie is kind of like more by the books a dark comedy, in that it makes fun of something macabre. So I'm interested to kind of put these two together from two great director minds and kind of see how they mix down. I think it'll be interesting.
Yeah. So, like, again, Doctor Strangelove, one of my favorites. Love it. And King of Comedy, I watched that not too long ago from Scorsese. And it is one of those movies where it is a very dark movie. It's one of the movies that the Joker was based off of.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where, and this is going to be the theme for that episode a little bit, is how do non-comedy directors tackle comedy? Because you would not say Kubrick is a comedy actor, right? And you wouldn't say Scorsese is a comedy director, right?
No, but there are certain things about Doctor Strangelove that I've done research on, where I really kind of am interested to dissect how Kubrick tackled comedy, because there's some things in there that I know that really were genius, and that some comedy directors later on probably took from him.
Mm.
So it'll be interesting to find all this out.
And honestly, I can't wait either. So David, where can people find us so they can listen to the next episode?
Right, so if you want to follow along with us to keep laughing all this month, you can find us on YouTube at In the Frame. This is where we post this podcast, our other podcast, Too Obscure for TV, and everything else. As well as you can listen to this podcast on anywhere you can find podcasts except Actal Music. Yes, we are still angry about it.
Yes.
We'll never stop.
But you can check us out on the Spotify. Spotify's better. Joe Rogan's on Spotify. There you go.
Exactly. Got to get those brain supplements going. You can also find us on other podcast platforms like Google Podcasts, Radio Public, etc., etc., etc. All the links are going to be down in the description. You can follow us along on Instagram to get updates for when these episodes come out on Instagram, following us at @doublefeature_podcast. And support our sponsor, Anchor FM. If you got a podcast idea of your own, go check them out. Dean, is there anything else that I missed?
If there's anything else that you missed, I'm forgetting it, but I can say something that I want to plug. You can also listen to more of me on my other podcast called the Film Club Podcast, which I do with my girlfriend, Miss Boo, who also runs our social media stuff here. And that one's kind of more of the same, but we talk about one movie and it's a little bit more of a lighter tone. Not a lot of like deep discussion, more like, where do we see this movie? More history of the film kind of deal. It's very fun. But yeah.
Very much so. Yes. Go check that out, everybody. But other than that, Dean, I mean, here we are, already halfway through April. It's been a wonderful one. Mm-hmm. Can't wait to keep it moving. And until then, I will see you next week.
I will see you next week as well. Peace.
See ya.